Welcome to our next session. I'm John Bottega, and our panel discussion here is data management as custodians versus owners of data. So let me just give a little bit of context to what we're going to talk about. Clearly, we're in the throes of a digital transformation. Right? It's affecting everything we do, our personal lives, our professional lives, how we conduct our business, the way we socialize, the way we exercise, the way we shop. I mean, we're even ordering food online these days. Traditional businesses and social paradigms are being replaced by this new business and social paradigm of doing everything online. And with this massive paradigm shift to online comes massive amounts of information moving into the cloud. As I mentioned in my opening comment this morning, the connected vehicle, terabyte of data to the cloud, every car, every day. Think about the massive amount of data that's being collected. Most analysts predict that by 2025, nearly half, 50% of all data will be stored in the cloud. How are firms embracing cloud? And with cloud, we see a host of opportunities. We also see a number of challenges. One of these challenges revolves around the concept of data accountability. In this new paradigm, who's ultimately responsible for data that sits in the cloud? Is it the end user? Is it the cloud provider? What about the tool providers? Or is it the analytic engines that's running in cloud? What roles with respect to data ownership versus data stewardship are all of these actors now playing in this new cloud paradigm? So in our next panel, we're going to explore these topics and discuss ways that industry is addressing or should address these challenges. What are some of the best practices that firms should be embracing? And as an extension of these challenges, what considerations in your cloud transformation are needed with respect to data security, privacy, and ethical use of data? So let me unshare my screen so I can welcome my colleagues. So, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Yolande, give me the screen back for a second. Because I do want to share my screen. There we go. And properly introduce my colleagues. There we go. So let me welcome our panelists. Vamshi Kaminini, Group Product Manager for Azure Storage at Microsoft, and Piyush Mehta, CEO and sponsor for this panel at Data Dynamics. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, John.
All right, now I'll bring us up on the screen. There we go. All right, so let's start with a very general question. So everybody is moving to the cloud. But sometimes you see that migration is simply following the herd. What do you see are the proper business cases for leveraging cloud? What are the right business drivers? So Piyush, let me start with you in dealing with your customers. What do you see is driving customers to cloud?
So clearly the initial number one benefit was cost, the ability to move infrastructure as well as applications and drive a more of a utility model versus an upfront investment. But I think as cloud has evolved, so has the use cases where it's become more of a, how is it a business benefit? How can I leverage the capabilities and scalabilities and the applications that I can garner that are native to the cloud that give me that edge and that allow me to have a differentiator? So regardless of vertical, we're finding more and more enterprise customers not only embrace the cloud, but accelerate that digital journey. And, if you, as you stated rightly, every aspect of our life touches a digital data point in some shape or form, whether it's ordering food or catching a taxi ride or anything else for that matter. Which means that as the data footprint grows, these enterprises are finding it that their growth continues to happen more and more so at a faster trajectory. And the cloud allows them to meet the requirements that come along with that digital journey in a far more capable manner. So I think the ability to leverage the cloud to expand their business, make it a competitive differentiator, And then obviously garner the cost savings are all benefits that we see customers leverage.
Right. Yeah, it's the cost play or the expandability play. I mean, there's lots of, I guess, reason there. Vamshi, now obviously Microsoft, you're looking to to sell the product, right? But have you ever run into clients when you went, this is not a cloud application? What are the things that are the right things to move in the cloud and maybe not so right things to move into the cloud?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, John. And I think the list of not right things has continued to become smaller over time as public cloud providers have expanded. I mean, historically, it used to be that people used to say, "Hey, I'm not so sure." As Piyush and you were pointing out, I already have hardware, on premises. Let me depreciate that, and then maybe I can, I have a longer lifetime left. So there's a switchover point there that is obvious, and switching to the OpEx model helps. That's gone away over time. That public cloud has been an in-GA service from one cloud provider to the other for almost 15 years now, especially cloud storage, which was the original service. So what we see now, as Piyush was pointing out, is it's much less about cost and much more about capability, and what people can do building cloud native applications in a completely different way, or using the cloud for much more computation capabilities. Being able to run HPC jobs much faster than they used to if they're, let's say a pharma or industry or financial services company, being able to use, retain and use a lot more data for analytics at cloud scale. You have thousands or tens of thousands of cores being able to run queries versus your on-premises data warehouses, or newer workloads like being able to run machine learning. Again, training and inference against a lot larger data sets. So I think it's really become much more about what can the cloud do that you couldn't do on premises. If there are workloads that aren't moving, some of them, to this day are still perhaps sovereignty issues, data sovereignty issues in regions where public cloud providers are not yet available. There's certainly data, residency and sort of privacy concerns, which lead some companies to keep their copies of data on premises. So these are some of the things that I think are the last remaining bastions. But even these areas, I think public cloud providers like ours have made a lot of inroads, working with customers, really helping understand their security needs, their residency needs. Even in heavily regulated industries, we're starting to see that acceleration of data moving and migrating into the cloud.
Actually, you hit something, and I'll ask this to both of you. Concept of education or awareness of cloud. Right? I remember back in remember the days of big data, right? When that was the hot topic, and I had someone reach out to me and says, I want to do big data. And I asked them why, and they said, because I just read an article on it. And that may not be the best business case. So is there an education side of it? Do we have to really, your end users, and I'm sure you do this at Microsoft and Fusion, I'm sure you do this with your customers, if what is the expression, the educated consumer is the best buyer, right? If they really know how to use it, then they take full advantage. Do you find that? Do you mix in a lot of kind of education and training, if you will, when you talk to your customers?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, John. I think you were talking about buzzwords. Things are really being used when they stop being buzzwords and they kind of slip from public consciousness. A few years after that is when the real usage happens. So even though big data is no longer perhaps the tech word du jour, I think we now see a lot more analytics workloads running in Azure and in other public clouds than we ever did a few years ago, and it was sort of the happening term. I think there's a lot more enterprises that are saying, hey, this is our analytics data lake on premises. How do we migrate this data, and how do we migrate it with all the data security and governance controls in place? How do we run analytics engines, whether it's the cloud provider's own analytics engine or something like Databricks that runs across clouds, Databricks or Snowflake or what have you. And you really have these analytics engines, the tools that are able to kind of really help you harness that data and run those workloads. So there's definitely education involved, to your point. But again, the education also has become more solution focused, more abstract. Where 5 years ago we were spending a lot of time talking about what is the cloud, what are the benefits of the cloud. Now I don't, we've spent hardly any time on those things. These are sort of accepted truths at this point, and now it's much more about what is my solution? Do you have something that meets the needs of my end-to-end problem or end-to-end solution that I'm trying to deploy? And how do what's my time to realize value? What's my time to realize new value that I couldn't do on premises? So we have definitely moved more into that mode of working with customers in a consultative way and helping them design solutions that move their needle forward.
So let me play off of that one, and Piyush, I'll point this question to you. I think we're recognizing, right, that cloud is not just simply an alternative storage capability, right? There's a lot more to it, and it really is a business enabler. Do you see in working with your clients, are they just doing lift and shift of existing apps, or are they really thinking differently and building new types of capabilities in cloud that they, heretofore maybe couldn't do well on-prem?
So it's interesting, initially the first step into the cloud has always been born in the cloud, which is how do I create applications and use the infrastructure that comes as part of that with the cloud providers. Obviously, now what we're seeing more and more of is customers moving their existing on-prem workloads into those cloud environments. And the challenge that we do see and that we end up educating customers on is, rather than do a lift and shift, try and be more intelligent about understanding your data, understanding what those workloads really mean for you and how you leverage them. So for example, we find that in the unstructured space, almost every enterprise we go into, between 65 and 70% of their data is not touched in over 3 years. Well, you're not really effectively using that data. All you're doing is storing it. So if you're moving it to the cloud, are you moving it to the right tier? And then how do you garner value from it? And how do you ensure compliance and governance? So these are all things that we educate our enterprise customers on as precursors to make sure that you're leveraging the cloud effectively, especially for workloads that may have been around for years or decades and that have just grown exponentially. You're looking at companies that are sitting with tens, if not hundreds of petabytes. And when you're looking at that type of workload movement, you want to make sure you're making the most effective use. And then, as Vamshi pointed, leveraging the tools and products and capabilities that the cloud providers offer as an overlay to extract value from it, rather than just simply storing it.
So you mentioned in the beginning, you said, understanding your data, and there was a question that just came in about how do you influence the categorization of my data, and that kind of dovetails into another question I wanted to ask, and that is, it's not all rosy, right? I mean, there's benefits cloud, but you have to do it right, or else there's challenges, and clearly those challenges speak to privacy, residency of data across jurisdictions, and so forth. So how, Vamshi, how do you work with your clients to ensure that, well, first, and we heard this in the early session today, right, about trust. So, client wants to put data into the Microsoft cloud, and, how do you ensure that that data is not going to land in a jurisdiction that's going to compromise, my client's information?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think, it kind of gets to the heart of this panel, which is, there's a shared responsibility between us as a cloud provider platform and our customers, and really have to understand, their data's, requirements, the requirements of the, countries they operate in or the regions they operate in. Security needs the types of data, the cataloging, classification of that data, and really, kind of helping do that. I think at a base level, we offer a set of fundamental capabilities. We offer customers, residency in many regions now. It used to be geopolitical regions, and now we increasingly have our data centers available in a lot of countries in Europe, not just sort of the EU region. We used to have EU West and EU North in Amsterdam and Ireland, respectively. And we've expanded now. We have data centers in Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, France, and so I think there's an aspect of we offer these capabilities, we offer the physical infrastructure, but customers make a choice about residency, and we offer tools and services both first party from the cloud provider itself and from our partners like Data Dynamics, where they can make the job of cataloging that data and classifying that data automatically based on some policy frameworks a lot more automated, especially when you get into data scale, unstructured data scale of the petabyte or hundreds of petabyte range.
So we clearly, we referred to the CDMC framework that's been developed with your colleagues' participation. And in that, we talked a lot about, who's responsible for the data from a user perspective or from the cloud perspective. And, the cloud provider doesn't necessarily know what's going into the container, so to speak. So there's got to be accountability on the user side. Flip side, of course, you just pointed out, is if I am aware of my data, I have to ensure that you're not putting it in a place that could compromise it, right? So circling back to our panel, is like, who, the shift of custodian versus owner is really becoming to the forefront as more data moves into the cloud. And I guess it goes back to good data management, right? Is our ever-evolving crop of chief data officers aware of these things, and and how are they allocating out, or I should say, how are they partnering with their chief information security officers and privacy officers? How are they getting that word around?
And I think that's a key point that you touched on, John. What we're finding is, this siloed approach of having a CISO, a CDO, a CIO all operate as independent entities versus collaboratively is the key to that answer. And that means that an understanding of the data, an understanding of the infrastructure, and then an understanding of the security associated are all tied together. You can't have one without the other. And what we are finding is that those silos are breaking down. We're seeing a lot more collaboration across organizations and across organizational structures that allow you to address that. Because you're absolutely right. When you think about stewardship versus ownership, if you think about who has access to the data, traditionally CISOs would say that falls under the security realm and not, under the CDO realm. The CDO would say, hey, I only care necessarily about the data itself and the governance of it, not necessarily the security of it. And then the infrastructure side will always say, hey, I gave you the containers in which they're stored. Now it's your problem how you manage them. And we're seeing a huge shift across almost every account and customer we're talking with that are on the journey, that are already in the cloud, that are in a hybrid cloud motion, where the need and the ability to cross-communicate, I think, drives the answer to your question, which is, it is not simply an ownership question from who is accessing the data and who owns it, but it's a collaborative effort on how are you managing that, because security is no longer a single-faceted aspect from what we're seeing.
So actually, what I'm hearing is we shouldn't be sitting at a rectangular table. We should be sitting at a round table.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's in this. In fact, one of the questions came in said, right to this point, when I move something to the cloud by choice or by provider, should I care about the physical location? I don't think you can abdicate that responsibility, right?
Yeah. It's a great question, yeah, it's a roundtable is exactly right. You have a lot of different stakeholders, inside the company that make these decisions, and you have some new, physical or virtual stakeholders in the form of the cloud provider, in the form of the data management and governance solutions, et cetera. And I think, to answer your question about should I care about the physical location of the data, quite likely yes, depending on the type of data, right? There may be some data where you say, hey, put this in the, least expensive location possible, or put this application data, automatically in the location closest by latency to, the end customer using this data. But there's definitely other data where you tell us, hey, put this data in this, storage account in this region, or a storage account or bucket, and you really kind of tag that data. So we really have moved to this notion of classification tagging. Some of it, automatic based on policy frameworks. So, some of it at creation of data in the application, or post-mortem jobs that are kind of going through and classifying data. So I think you do have to understand, the basics for location. We talked about security. You have to understand that some of the data, you want encrypted on the way in, right? You might even provide us an encryption key for us to encrypt the data, or and that sort of, and you can have an encryption key per object if you'd like, right? That's a capability that the cloud providers offer. Or you could just say, hey, this is data that I want to give you one key. I'm going to put it in an HSM, a physical HSM that's connected into the cloud, or using a cloud provider's HSM as a service, and say encrypt all of this data with the security keys. So there's this gamut for sure that you have to really understand and look at.
So you just brought up an interesting point, and to be a little bit nerdy here for a second, when programmers went from C to C++, they coded in C++, but never used any of the features of C++. They used the old features, right? So do you find that people are moving to cloud but still being very narrowly thought in on-prem and not leveraging those tools you just described?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great point. Is how do we raise awareness of the kinds of services and tools that exist in the cloud that did not exist on premises? So the notion of scanning every piece of data and running, even though this is again perhaps the tech du jour of the day, machine learning algorithms to kind of understand automatically, and classify like for like. Those are tools that exist today. Those are, capabilities, they're platform capabilities, they're solutions on top that can help you kind of get a handle on your data in a much more comprehensive way. We're talking about data cataloging classification, right? What is HBI data, high business impact data? What data contains personally identifiable information? What data is subject to GDPR regulations? This is stuff that, perhaps at one point people were worrying about how to do this manually, or how to do this in a way that, they had sort of stores of data and silos and a lot of structure and a lot of sort of human-enabled metadata, which, you can kind of flip that on its end and say, hey, I can set some policies, I can set some examples, some guidance, some deterministic, some heuristic, and let a service kind of really come in and help manage that data for you. So I think that there is that shift of understanding of the services that are available now.
Kind of.
And Pius does some of this, so maybe he can add to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a categorization standpoint and understanding, it becomes essential. You mentioned, do I really care about the physical location? More and more regulatory requirements actually compel you to care, because you're supposed to have an understanding of what data you're storing, for whom the data was created by. And that leads to a must-have rather than a nice-to-have. The second part is that the more knowledge that you can add, especially, when we say unstructured, the more structure you can add to the unstructured via categorization, via tagging, the more you're able to leverage the data. The biggest delta that we find is storing data for the sake of storing it is just a storage conversation. but leveraging it as a business differentiator is really the compelling reason of the data getting created and being stored, right? And that delta can only come by leveraging products and capabilities that can allow you to take advantage of finding that canary in a coal mine.
So, gentlemen, we're coming near the end. Before I wrap up, I just want to throw one more question out to you. So what I'm hearing is kind of I'm going to drive a nail in with a screwdriver, and I didn't know there was a hammer there. Right. So if we're going to talk about accountability, we can't not talk, or I should say, we can't talk about accountability without knowing the capabilities. Right? Because then instead of having a dialogue, well, it's my responsibility, your responsibility, if I know the tools, then that kind of flushes out. So as a closing statement, what would you say are the key capabilities that or things that are available that you would tell your clients so that they get over this issue about who's accountable? They'll understand the tools available and the roles. And Piyush, if I could start with you, just a few comments, and then Vamshi, you could wrap it up for us.
From our standpoint, I think it's really important that when you're looking at the transformation to the cloud, understanding your legacy data from a ownership, a lineage, a compliance requirement or non-requirement standpoint, a cataloging standpoint, and then how you wish to leverage it as a competitive differentiator, both from a line of business as well as from an aggregate IT standpoint, are important areas to consider. I look at what you guys have built with your assessment capability as the EDM council in your CDMC. And it's exactly that. How do you make sure you have a full 360-degree awareness of all aspects that go around data management? And how do you leverage preferably a single platform that can drive that awareness and can drive that actionability into fruition?
And Vamshi, bring us home.
Yeah, no, I think Piyush is spot on. And it's really kind of understanding, hey, there's a shared responsibility model. The cloud providers have removed some of that, day-to-day infrastructure migration and scale concerns, but that's freeing up more time to think about these higher layer issues of data governance and lineage and classification and all of that. And there are capabilities, platform capabilities. There are software partners that offer these capabilities. So really understanding, the tools, to your point, and knowing what you can do with that is a step forward.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, we're at the end. Thanks for your insights. Thank you both for your contributions to the CDMC. Piyush, thank you for saying the council developer, but it was a collaborative activity with many, many contributors and hours, and when we thank everybody for that. Again, thanks everybody. Thanks for attending. For any questions we didn't respond to, we will get to post the event.
Thanks, John. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.